So today someone sent me the newspaper clipping death notice of a Hare Krishna child who has died at the age of only 29, a female, and they wanted me to publish the story, but I've decided not to give the name of this person because probably there's a lot of grief already going on with the other family members right now. But I do think it's important to describe why so many of these Hare Krishna children are leaving their bodies prematurely. There's definitely a problem going on here. A number of these children got involved with drugs, and some of them even got involved with prostitution, and some of them were drinking, and this took a toll on their health and well-being. Now, in addition to all that, there has been a number of incidents of cancer amongst these, let's say, Hare Krishna children. So what happened? In all fairness, it is not only the Hare Krishna children who have suffered from cancer and premature deaths. There's been an epidemic of cancer and other fatal ailments amongst the adults of the Krishna religion as well. For example, the parents of this now deceased Hare Krishna kid are also deceased. And the father of this child was a severe crack addict. So he had a big crack problem, and that led to his death for sure. The mother, I don't know if she was taking drugs, but she was certainly a very stressed out individual, which doesn't add to your longevity at all. Now, originally, the parents of this child were initiated by Satsvarup Das Goswami, the person who writes, "The more I chant, the drier it gets." And he was a big supporter of the homosexual pedophile guru program overall, which was victimizing children left, right, and center all over the place. And when me and Sulochan complained about this, Satsarup said we are poison pens, which Sulochan said is painting a bullseye on our backs to have us assassinated, and Sulochan was assassinated. So the parents of this child were involved with this whole Satsvarup situation, and then they went to Los Angeles, and the father of this child became an enforcer for Rameshwara. And he later on admitted to me that he was doing a lot of dark deeds for Rameshwara, being the enforcer. And one of the things he was involved with was when they were hunting for Sulochan. He said he was part of that whole process, and it made him eventually very distraught to know he was part of this whole process. So if you are the enforcer for a fraudulent guru and you find out later on that he is a fraud and you did a lot of dark deeds to serve this fraud guru, this will cause a lot of repercussions on a person who has a conscience. And this also happened in Berkeley. The bouncer enforcer at the temple here became my friend. He agreed eventually that Hansaduta is a fraud. He told me I've done a lot of dark deeds for Hansaduta. And 1 year later, he ended his life. He couldn't live with himself, realizing he had done all these dark deeds for a fraud program. So I believe the parent of this child, who is now departed, had the same issues. You know, he realized he had been serving Rameshwara. Rameshwara was a fraud. He was an enforcer for Rameshwara. And he told me he has done dark things for Rameshwara, being the enforcer. So this caught up with his conscience, and he felt bad, no question about it. So I believe, in other words, that people like Satsvarup and Rameshwara and others are part of the whole process of putting the parents into this distressful situation, and then the children suffer as a result, as a byproduct of that process. So is Rameshwara 100% responsible? Well, no, but he is many percent responsible, over 50% responsible. I mean, the parents also have to use their own discrimination and realize, how can this Rameshwara guy be a pure devotee? How can Satsvarup be a pure devotee? They should have that discrimination themselves. But if they do get caught up in these false regimes, then the children suffer. And not only suffer, but they may have their lives terminated prematurely, as we have seen in different instances. Now, some of these children took their lives intentionally. One of them killed himself here in San Francisco, and he left behind a note saying he has no position in his own religion. So he was very distraught. And another child took his life in Los Angeles when he saw that the person who had victimized him was being given a glorious reception at the Los Angeles temple, and he told a friend of mine, just see, they promised that this person would not have a position of authority, and once again he's being worshipped, and he just went home and took his life after that. And that has happened in a number of cases where the children see the people who abused them or who orchestrated the system that abused them are being glorified and worshipped in ISKCON as big authorities or even as messiahs, and they have to just suck it up and, participate in that. So it's just intolerable for victims. Now, this young lady had wanted to become a professional model at some point, and I think she might have been successful. She was a very attractive young lady. She could have made it. But that begs the question, why isn't she trying to become a temple pujari for ISKCON? Why isn't she sewing for the deities of ISKCON? Why isn't she doing Sankirtan for ISKCON? So she realized she has no position in ISKCON, so she has to go elsewhere. Now, I'm not criticizing that some of these people want to become models, because once they leave ISKCON, they have no shelter, they have no way to sustain themselves, so they have to get a job of some kind. The problem is, in ISKCON, they didn't get any training for having a career in the material world. They just get out of ISKCON. The Gurukula system didn't really train them in a career. I had some friends, devotee boys, young boys, who were very happy that they had got a job at McDonald's flipping hamburgers, because now, at least, they weren't going to become homeless bums, living on the street. At least they had some means of sustaining themselves. So that means ISKCON failed them on every level. ISKCON failed to give them a position within the ISKCON society, and failed to give them training in a mundane career in the mundane world. So they were not ready to go into the material world, and ISKCON was no longer accepting these people to be participating in the society. So they're between a rock and a hard place. Now, if you add to that the parents' lives were turned topsy-turvy by serving these ISKCON gurus, and the parents were also in a very distressful material situation, being exploited by the ISKCON gurus, then you have a double whammy effect where the children have no material foundation, the parents of those children have no material foundation, and everything just collapses, or is capable of collapsing very easily, and has collapsed in many cases. Now, there are some devotee children who made out well. It's possible, but it didn't happen in many, many cases, and it certainly did not happen in this case. Now, there was another young lady also in Los Angeles who was the daughter of an ISKCON lawyer, and that lawyer was helping the ISKCON society defend itself from the child molesting claims that were being made by many of these children victims. So that didn't make this young lady popular with the other children, because the other children saw her father as being an enemy who was defending the molesting empire, and he was against the children. So she told a friend of mine she couldn't make any friends. Her father made it impossible for her to make friends with the other children. So she started getting into severe intoxication and many, many other problems, and her life just spiraled down, and nothing substantial was ever done by any ISKCON leaders or authorities or anything else to help her out, and eventually she also died, probably from a drug overdose. That's what many people believe happened here. So even their own children aren't protected in this situation. What is being protected? What is being protected is the homosexual and pedophile guru system at all costs, including at the expense of the children of the society. The children have suffered terribly in so many instances, and no one seems to be keeping even a record of all this. We have these children suffering in so many different ways. They're dying from intoxication. They're dying in different ways. Some of them have become homeless, and some of them are in very dire situations here, there, and all over the place, and no one's keeping track of that. And I have some ex-Gurukuli friends here, and they said no one knows who we are, where we are, what our situation is, or how much trouble we had from ISKCON, or how much trouble we're having now as a result of our being part of ISKCON. No one cares, in other words. And I have to concur. I believe that's true. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of concern for what is going on with these people, and there's certainly no, let's say, track record being made and paper trail being made of all these different victims and what has happened to them and where they are and what happened to them and all the rest of it. And they don't even get like an honorable mention on the big ISKCON websites, with rare exceptions. I mean, maybe if there's a car crash, something like that, they'll put up some kind of a memorial for those children, but other than that, we don't really hear much about all the other victims and what happened to all the other victims. Now, not all the other victims, of course, died or are dying, but they've had many other problems. I mean, I know a young lady who, when she was 17, she tried to stab her mother to death with a pair of scissors, and the police were called, and it was a whole big mess. And that has impacted her life ever since. She's just had mental problems ever since. I mean, she's now somewhat stabilized, but the point is, her childhood was a disaster, and it put a lot of stress and distress on her mentally, physically, and every other way. So that she survived all this at all is like, in some ways, a miracle. I mean, really, because no care was put towards her situation. There was no part of the organization that reached out to do something. And I believe she had all this mental distress because the society was worshiping these bogus people, these predators and illicit sex mongers and, all kinds of criminals were being worshipped as the leaders of the society, and it has an impact all the way down to the bottom level, which is the children. Okay? It affects everything in the society. You can't have the children escape from a cult that's worshiping deviants and criminals and predators and illicit sex and porno swamis and drunks and all kinds of deranged people as its messiahs, and expect the children will not have any impact from that. They will have an impact. Now, I have a devoted lady friend. She grew up in the society. She was one of these Krishna kids. And she recently said, we were supposed to be the Vaikuntha children. Vaikuntha means the heavenly worlds, or heaven. So we descended from heaven, or we descended from the heavenly planets into the care of these people, and they did not take care of us, Our parents didn't take care of us. The leaders didn't take care of us. Nobody took care of us, and we ended up being exploited. So don't you think that if God hands you something from Vaikuntha or the heavenly planets, you should take good care of that? Well, they did not take good care of us. And I don't have any good counter statement to give that person. What am I supposed to say? She is right. She was mistreated, mishandled on every level, and she has suffered, and she's still suffering. She has PTSD, she has nightmares, she has flashbacks, she has all kinds of problems. And who is even aware of all that? I don't know, amongst the leaders of the society. So I think the leaders of the society just don't seem to have any realization of how much distress they have caused to other people. And I have a karmi, quote-unquote, friend, an outside person who's not part of the society, and he says it just looks like the leaders of ISKCON just totally destroy other people's lives on every single level. Just totally ruin and destroy and disturb other people's lives, and they don't seem to have any awareness that they're doing that, or any concern that they're doing that. And that compounds the problem, because then the victims feel they're being neglected. We were abused in the first case, and now there's no support or backup to help us after we've been victimized, which makes the situation worse. Now, ISKCON has these quote-unquote therapy people, like Rambaru and others, going around saying they're going to give therapy to the victims. But why were the children victimized in the first place? That question is not being answered. The answer is these leaders misled the children. That's what happened. And the same leaders are still in office now. And rectification has not happened. And the victims know that. Many of these children tell me the same people that caused all the trouble for us all along, like Satsvarup and Bhavananda and Jayapataka and Hridayananda and Giriraj and all the rest of these guys, are still floating around. Now, another thing that happened was that the parents of this girl ran off to Narayan Maharaj. They followed Gopavinda Pal and Mula Prakriti and all these other people who ran off to Narayan Maharaj. And Narayan Maharaj was the biggest cheerleader of Tamal Krishna and the homosexual and pedophile guru process. When Narayan Maharaj was in Texas, he was yelling at my associates for criticizing Tamal Krishna. And at the very exact same time, I was in Texas having Tamal sued for $400 million for mass child molesting. So Narayan Maharaj is a big cheerleader of the homosexual pedophile guru process, and then the parents of this girl run off to that person who is the defender of the cult, and they think that's a solution. Not a solution at all. You can't, get relief from suffering by going to the main people creating the suffering. That's not going to give you relief. It's just going to create more suffering. So, Narayan Maharaj, we could go on and on about him, but he encouraged Tamal Krishna, he encouraged all these gurus. He was the Rasika guru of these people. Rasa means the divine love of Krishna with his consorts. So just imagine, we're mixing up pedophiles, homosexuals, taking drugs, intoxicated gurus, porno Swami gurus and everything else, and we're mixing that up with the pure love of Krishna with his consorts. What could go wrong there? So that's going to cause all kinds of problems, and it has. And Prabhupada says in Bengal they have all these what are called sahajas, and that is one of the symptoms of the sahajas. They mix up illicit behavior with the divine love of Krishna and his consorts. And Prabhupada says this has dragged all of Bengal to hell, and that is why Bengal is suffering so badly on the material plane. So, same thing, ISKCON is suffering, and the citizens of ISKCON are suffering because they're mixing up all these material things, including illicit sex with men, women, and children, and Radha and Krishna and Rasika. You just can't do all that. It's going to have a bad effect on the society, and it's going to have a terrible effect on the children of that society, and it has. So the children of ISKCON got waylaid and misled, and they didn't get trained in a career in the material world, so they basically ended up in a very bad situation. Now, some of these children have told me, we are the Varna Sankara. Varna Sankara means unwanted progeny. We were not wanted in our society. That's what they believe happened to them. We weren't given a position in our society. Now, Prabhupada had wanted that these children would be the current managers of ISKCON. They would have been trained up to take over the society, but they are not. They're being banned and barred and excluded, and very few of them are participating at all. What has happened instead is that ISKCON is getting more and more and more into promoting a Hindu culture. They're bringing in Hindus into ISKCON to take over, and many Hindus are now the signers on the properties and that type of thing. So it is becoming a Hindu business, and Prabhupada said that if the Hindus take over my mission, it will become a business. Now, I have a friend who's very active in ISKCON still. He likes me, but he's got a job, with them. And he says he knows many of these Hindus who come to the temple, and he knows what they do, he knows where they go, he knows what restaurants they go to, and he knows how these Hindus live. And he says at least 50% of the Hindus that come to his ISKCON temple eat meat. They're meat eaters. And he says at least 25% of the Hindus who come to their temple believe that Ram Krishna Paramahamsa is an incarnation of Krishna. And Satya Sai Baba is an incarnation of Krishna, and so on and so forth. These people have severe misconceptions about the religion. So the leaders aren't interested in having people understand the factual basis of the religion. They're just converting it into a kind of a Hindu business at the expense of these children. They had to exclude these children out, shut them out, so they could make this Hindu business situation, which they have done. So the victims know that. These children are very aware they've been cut out. And they tell me that. We have been excluded out. We've been basically shuffled out the door by these leaders so they could make a Hindu-Bindu business out of ISKCON. So we just wanted to summarize a little bit here that these children suffered very badly. My own children suffered as well. I mean, my own children thought my dad is going to get whacked by these people. These people are taking out dissenters. My dad is a dissenter. At any moment, he can be taken away. So my kids grew up in anxiety thinking this homosexual pedophile cult will remove their dad from the planet. That's not a good way for children to have to grow up, you know. So that's what they've created. And this unfortunate incident is simply one on top of a pile and pile and pile of bodies that have been victims of this process. And some of the victims are adults, as I've tried to explain also. Like one lady friend of mine told me she had given up the will to live because she had been kicked out of her service of serving the deity, and she died. She died of cancer. And she just checked out of here. She just couldn't handle the situation. So again, I just don't think the leaders of ISKCON understand how they're destroying other people's lives and ruining other people's lives. And in directly or indirectly ways, they are taking people's lives. People's lives are ending because of all of this stuff. Very unfortunate. Anyway, all that being said, I pray for the welfare of the soul of this poor child. She came to the ISKCON Society by birth. The society caused her more grief and trouble and distress than if she had been born just as a regular citizen somewhere else. I believe that. I believe she went through more distress than many average people go through. And that is because, for starters, the average person do not, under any circumstances, force children to worship illicit sex with men, women, and children, deviants, as their messiahs. They just never, ever do that. They don't dream of doing that. They don't think of doing that because they know it will have devastating consequences on the children involved in that situation. Nor does the average citizen go to somebody like Narayan Maharaj and mix up illicit sex with men, women, and children with God and God's conjugal affairs. They would never even dream of doing such deviations. It's just beyond their comprehension why anybody would do that, because it has devastating consequences. Anyway, we'll find out more as time goes on, but this is starting to unravel more and more and more. One of the victims, a young girl victim of one of these gurus, told me that she wants to bring her story out into the public, but she's afraid of the social repercussions. So there's still a lot of cult-type stuff going on in and around the ISKCON Society. It's still having an adverse effect on these children. And it just needs to be cleared up. And unless it is cleared up, there will be more ongoing suffering amongst these victims and the families of these victims. And I hate to say it, but this will continue on. The children who were victimized and who are traumatized will have children, and they will just pass on the trauma and victimization to their children. It will just go on and on and on until it's all exposed and the truth comes out about all this stuff. So we hope that will happen eventually, and it probably will, but it may take a generation or two for that to happen. So this poor girl's body was found in an alleyway in Los Angeles. The coroner is doing an investigation about the cause of her departure. But I already know the cause of her departure. Her parents were exploited to the bone, and the children of those parents were not taken into consideration. What will be the reaction to that? And she is a victim. Another victim of this whole process who left their body untimely for one reason or another. And it's a very sad thing that this keeps repeating, but there is an explanation, and we hope this helps to give that explanation. Hari Bol.